Karoline Leavitt walked into the large lecture hall 5 minutes early. She chose a seat in the back row where she could see everyone. This was her first day in Professor Alan Winter's advanced calculus class at Westfield University. She had heard stories about him from other students. They said he was brilliant but also very tough on students who didn't share his political views. Karoline opened her notebook and watched as other students filled the room. Many looked nervous. Professor Winters had a reputation for making examples of students he didn't like. Karoline wasn't worried about the math. She had always been good with numbers. But she was concerned about fitting in at her new school. The classroom fell silent as Professor Winters entered. He was tall, with gray hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He carried a worn leather briefcase that looked as old as some of his students. Without saying hello, he began writing complex equations on the board. "Welcome to Advanced Calculus," he said without turning around. "This isn't a class for the faint of heart. If you're looking for an easy A, you should leave now." No one moved. Professor Winters smiled slightly. "Let's start with introductions. Tell us your name, your major, and something interesting about yourself." The introductions moved row by row. When it was Karoline's turn, she stood up straight. "I'm Karoline Leavitt. I'm majoring in political science with a minor in mathematics. Before transferring here, I worked as an intern for Congressman Jack Miller." Professor Winters raised an eyebrow. Congressman Miller was known for his conservative views and frequent appearances on right-wing news channels. "Interesting," Professor Winters said slowly. "Very interesting. I hope your political work hasn't distracted you from your studies. This class requires logical thinking." A few students laughed. Karoline felt her cheeks grow warm, but she kept her face calm. She was used to people making assumptions about her based on her political work. For the next week, Professor Winters seemed to forget about Karoline. She sat quietly, took detailed notes, and answered questions correctly when called on. She started to think maybe the stories about him targeting conservative students were exaggerated. Then came the third class of the semester. Professor Winters was explaining a particularly difficult concept involving differential equations. "This is where many students get lost," he said, writing a complex formula on the board. "Let's see if anyone can solve this." His eyes scanned the room and landed on Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt, perhaps you'd like to show us how to solve this? I understand people with your political background sometimes struggle with complex thinking." The room went silent. Karoline felt everyone's eyes on her. A girl named Olivia Barnes, who sat across the room, gave her a sympathetic look. Karoline stood up slowly. What Professor Winters didn't know was that math had always been Karoline's secret talent. While her political work was what people noticed, mathematics had been her passion since childhood. She had won 3 national math competitions in high school and had even published a paper on differential equations when she was just 16. She walked to the board, took the chalk from Professor Winters, and began to work through the problem. Her hand moved quickly and confidently. She didn't hesitate once. When she finished, she placed the chalk back on the ledge and turned to face the class. "Is this correct, Professor?" she asked quietly. Professor Winters looked surprised. He checked her work, looking for mistakes. Finding none, he nodded curtly. "Yes, that's correct. You may sit down." As Karoline returned to her seat, she noticed other students looking at her with new respect. Olivia gave her a thumbs up. After class, Olivia approached Karoline as she packed up her books. "That was amazing," Olivia said. "No one stands up to Professor Winters like that." "I wasn't trying to stand up to him," Karoline replied. "I was just solving the problem." "Well, you made an impression. Do you want to grab coffee? My roommate is in his class from last year, and she has some stories you might want to hear." Karoline agreed, and they walked to the campus coffee shop. Olivia's roommate, Beth Daniels, was waiting for them. Beth had short brown hair and a friendly smile. "So you're the new girl who solved Winter's impossible problem," Beth said. "Nice to meet you." "Was it really impossible?" Karoline asked. "No, but he usually saves those problems for the end of the semester," Beth explained. "He was trying to embarrass you." "Why would he do that?" Karoline asked, although she already knew the answer. "He Googles his students," Beth said. He probably found that video of you speaking at that rally for Congressman Miller. Winters hates anything conservative. He thinks everyone who doesn't share his views is stupid. That's not fair, Karoline said. Political views have nothing to do with intelligence or math ability. Try telling him that, Beth replied. Over the next 2 weeks, Professor Winters called on Karoline repeatedly, always with the hardest problems. Each time she solved them correctly. She never showed off or acted smug. She simply did the work and sat down. This seemed to frustrate Professor Winters more than if she had made mistakes. After one class, he asked her to stay behind. "Ms. Leavitt, where did you learn calculus?" he asked. "I had a good teacher in high school," she said simply. She didn't mention the advanced math camps she had attended every summer since she was 12, or the online courses she had taken from MIT professors. "Your work is, adequate," Professor Winters said. "But I wonder if you truly understand the deeper principles. Math isn't just about getting the right answer. It's about understanding. Why?" "I agree," Karoline said. "That's why I love it." Professor Winters looked surprised again. "You love mathematics?" "Yes. I always have." He seemed unsure how to respond to this. "Well, we'll see how you do on the upcoming exam. Many students find it quite challenging." "I'm looking forward to it," Karoline said honestly. As she left his office, she ran into a teaching assistant named Greg Foster. He was tall, with dark hair and friendly eyes. "Don't let him get to you," Greg said quietly. "He does this every semester. Finds a student he thinks doesn't belong and tries to drive them out." "I'm not going anywhere," Karoline said firmly. "Good," Greg replied with a smile. "By the way, a bunch of us have a study group on Thursday nights. You should join us." Karoline thanked him and agreed to come. As she walked across campus, she thought about Professor Winters. She wasn't angry at him, just disappointed. She had hoped college would be different from high school, where people had also made assumptions about her based on her politics. That evening, Karoline called her parents. Her mother answered on the second ring. "How's school going, honey?" she asked. "It's interesting," Karoline said. "There's this professor who doesn't like me because I worked for Congressman Miller." "Oh, Karoline," her mother sighed. "Not again." "It's okay, Mom. He's giving me hard math problems and I'm solving them all." "Of course you are," her mother said proudly. "Just like you always do." After they hung up, Karoline opened her calculus textbook. The exam was in 2 weeks and she wanted to be ready. She wasn't studying just to prove Professor Winters wrong. She was studying because she truly loved mathematics. The elegant logic of it, the way everything connected, the beautiful patterns hidden in the chaos. Professor Winters might think he knew who she was based on her political work, but there was so much more to Karoline Leavitt than he could ever guess. And soon, he would find out just what she was capable of. Thursday evening came and Karoline made her way to the library for the study group. She found Greg and 5 other students at a large table in the back corner. Olivia was there too, which made Karoline feel more comfortable. "Everyone, this is Karoline," Greg said. "She's the one who solved Professor Winters' impossible equation on the first try." A boy with glasses and curly hair looked impressed. "I'm Peter," he said. "That problem took me 3 attempts last semester, and I'm a math major." Karoline smiled. "I've always been good with numbers." "Good is an understatement," Olivia said. "You should have seen Professor Winters' face. He looked like he had swallowed something sour." Everyone laughed, and Karoline felt herself relax. For the next 2 hours, they worked through practice problems together. Karoline was surprised to find that she enjoyed helping others understand difficult concepts. When she explained things, she made them simple. The other students appreciated this. "Where did you learn to break down complex ideas like that?" asked a girl named Megan. Karoline thought about the question. "My dad is a car mechanic. He always says if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. Yourself." "Your dad is smart," Greg said. "Professor Winters could learn from him." As they packed up their books, Greg pulled Karoline aside. "You know, Professor Winters isn't a bad person. He just has strong opinions." "About math?" Karoline asked. "About everything." He thinks the world should work a certain way. When it doesn't, he gets frustrated. Karoline nodded. I understand that, but it's not fair to take it out on students. I agree, Greg said. Just know that beneath all that, he really does care about mathematics. It's his life's work. The next day in class, Professor Winters announced the upcoming exam. This will count for 30% of your final grade, he said. It will cover everything we've learned so far, plus some additional concepts from Chapter 7. Students looked at each other in confusion. They hadn't covered Chapter 7 yet. But Professor, a student named Ryan, said, We haven't started Chapter 7. Then I suggest you start reading it, Professor Winters replied coldly. His eyes found Karoline. Unless, of course, you find the material too challenging. Karoline said nothing. She had already read all the chapters in the textbook before the semester even started. But she knew most students hadn't. After class, Ryan approached Karoline. He's doing this because of you, he said angrily. He's making the test harder for everyone because he can't stand that you keep getting things right. That's not fair, Karoline said. I didn't ask for any of this. Maybe not, Ryan said, but now we all have to suffer. Karoline felt terrible. She went to the campus coffee shop alone to think. As she sipped her coffee, Professor Nancy Clark, the head of the mathematics department, walked in. Karoline had met her briefly during orientation. Professor Clark noticed Karoline and came over. Ms. Leavitt, right? How are you finding Westfield so far? It's been interesting, Karoline said carefully. Professor Clark smiled. That's a diplomatic answer. I hear you're in Alan Winters' calculus class. Karoline nodded. And how is that going? Karoline wasn't sure how much to say. Professor Clark was Professor Winters' boss, after all. It's challenging, she said finally. I imagine it is, in more ways than one. Professor Clark sat down across from Karoline. You know, I reviewed your application when you transferred here. Your math scores were exceptional. Thank you, Karoline said, surprised. In fact, I was hoping you might consider changing your minor to a double major. We could use more students with your abilities. Karoline was stunned. I'll think about it. Good. Professor Clark stood up. And don't worry too much about Alan. His bark is worse than his bite. That evening, Karoline called her mother. Again. The head of the math department wants me to double major, she said excitedly. That's wonderful, honey, her mother said. But what about your political science degree? I could do both, Karoline said. It would mean an extra semester, maybe. If that's what you want, we'll support you. But why the sudden interest? I thought you wanted to work in politics after college. Karoline thought about it. I do. But I love math too. Maybe I could do both somehow. You've always been good at juggling different things, her mother said. Just like your father. The next day, Karoline arrived early to Professor Winters' class. She was surprised to find him already there, writing equations on the board. Ms. Leavitt, he said, without turning around. Come to get a head start? Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the exam, Karoline said. Professor Winters finally turned to look at her. What about it? I was wondering if you would consider only testing us on the material we've covered in class. Professor Winters raised an eyebrow. Finding Chapter 7 too difficult after all? No, Karoline said honestly. I've already read it, but many students haven't, and they're worried. College is about self-study, Ms. Leavitt. The world doesn't spoon-feed information. I understand that, Karoline said. But isn't the purpose of an exam to test what you've taught us? Professor Winters studied her for a moment. Are you concerned about your grade or everyone else's? Both, Karoline admitted. It's not fair to make the test harder for everyone because... She stopped herself. Because what? Professor Winters prompted. Because you're trying to prove a point to me. Karoline finished quietly. Professor Winters looked surprised, then angry, then thoughtful. You think highly of yourself, Ms. Leavitt. No, Karoline said. I just want everyone to have a fair chance. Before Professor Winters could respond, other students began to arrive. Karoline went to her seat, uncertain if she had made things better or worse. That afternoon, Karoline met with the study group again. They were all worried about the exam. "I talked to Professor Winters this morning," Karoline told them, "about the test covering Chapter 7. "What did he say?" Olivia asked anxiously. "Not much," Karoline admitted. "But I think he listened." Greg looked at her with new respect. "That was brave. Most students are too afraid to talk to him directly." "I'm not afraid of him," Karoline said. "I just don't understand why he makes things so personal." "It's because of what happened last year," Peter said. "He was up for department chair, but they gave it to Professor Clark instead. Some people say it's because the administration thought his political views were too extreme." "That's not our fault," Megan said. "No," Greg agreed, "but sometimes people need someone to blame." They studied for hours, focusing on chapters 1 through 6, but also reviewing chapter 7 just in case. Karoline helped everyone understand the most difficult concepts. By the end, even Ryan seemed less angry with her. The next day, Professor Winters made an announcement. "After further consideration, the exam will only cover the material we have discussed in class. Chapter 7 will be on the final exam instead." A wave of relief swept through the room. Olivia caught Karoline's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." After class, Professor Winters stopped Karoline at the door. "Don't think this means I'm going easy on anyone, Ms. Leavitt. The exam will still be challenging." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Karoline said. For the first time, Professor Winters almost smiled. "Professor Clark tells me you're considering a double major." "I'm thinking about it," Karoline said. "The math department could use more diverse perspectives," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But it requires serious commitment. I'm not afraid of hard work," Karoline assured him. Professor Winters nodded. "We'll see. The exam is on Friday. Good luck, Ms. Leavitt." As Karoline walked away, she felt something had shifted between them. Not friendship, certainly not that, but perhaps the beginning of respect. Friday morning arrived and students gathered outside the classroom, nervously reviewing their notes before the big exam. Karoline felt calm. She had studied well and helped others prepare too. The study group had met every night that week, going over practice problems until everyone felt confident. Olivia paced back and forth, reciting formulas under her breath. Peter flipped through flashcards. Even Ryan seemed less angry now, nodding at Karoline when she arrived. "Ready?" Greg asked, appearing beside her. "As ready as I'll ever be," Karoline replied. "Thanks to you, we all have a better chance," Greg said quietly. "What you did standing up to Professor Winters, that took courage." Karoline shrugged. It was the right thing to do. The classroom door opened, and Professor Winters stood there, holding a stack of papers. "Take your seats," he said. "No talking. Once the exam begins." Karoline sat in her usual spot at the back of the room. Professor Winters handed out the tests face down. "You have 2 hours," he announced. "Begin now." Karoline turned over her paper and studied the first problem. It was challenging but fair. She worked through it methodically, showing each step of her solution. The second problem was harder but still covered material they had learned in class. By the third problem, Karoline was in her element, lost in the elegant world of mathematics, where everything made sense. About halfway through the exam, she glanced up and caught Professor Winters watching her. His face was unreadable. Karoline returned to her work, moving steadily through each problem. With 15 minutes remaining, Karoline finished the last question. She reviewed all her answers carefully, checking for errors. Finding none, she stood up and walked to the front of the room to hand in her paper. Professor Winters took it without comment. Karoline was the first to finish. As she left the classroom, she felt good about her performance. The test had been difficult but fair, just as Professor Winters had promised. Outside, she waited for her friends. One by one, they emerged from the classroom with mixed expressions. "That was brutal," Olivia said when she finally came out. but I think I passed. The last two problems were killers, Peter admitted. But the study sessions helped a lot. How did you do? Megan asked Caroline. I think I did okay, Caroline said modestly. Greg laughed. Translation, she aced it. They decided to celebrate the end of the exam by going out for pizza. As they walked across campus, Caroline noticed flyers posted on bulletin boards announcing the annual Mathematics Department Challenge. What's that? She asked, pointing to a flyer. It's a big competition, Greg explained. Teams of 3 solve increasingly difficult problems over a weekend. The winning team gets a scholarship and recognition at the honors ceremony. Sounds interesting, Caroline said, reading the details. It's incredibly hard, Peter added. The problems are graduate level. Professor Winters is one of the judges. You should enter, Greg suggested. You'd be good at it. Caroline hesitated. I don't know. I'll be on your team, Olivia offered. I'm not a math genius like you, but I work hard. Me too, Peter said. We could make a decent team. Caroline thought about it. Okay, she said finally. Let's do it. They signed up for the competition before heading to the pizza place. Caroline was excited about the challenge, but also nervous. This would be her first time participating in a math competition at the college level. The following Monday, Professor Winters returned their exams. He called each student by name, handing back the papers with brief comments. When he reached Caroline's name, the room went quiet. Ms. Leavitt, he said, holding her exam. Perfect score, the only one in the class. Whispers spread through the room. Caroline took her paper, noticing the red 100% at the top, along with a small note. Exceptional work. Thank you, she said quietly. Professor Winters nodded. I'd like to see you after class. When everyone else had left, Caroline approached his desk. You wanted to see me? Yes, Professor Winters said, closing his gradebook. I understand you've entered the Mathematics Department Challenge. That's right, Caroline confirmed, with Olivia and Peter. You do realize the level of difficulty? These aren't classroom problems. They're designed to challenge our best students. I understand, Caroline said. We want to try anyway. Professor Winters studied her for a moment. Your performance on the exam was impressive. I'm curious about your background in mathematics. Caroline hesitated, then decided to be honest. I've always loved math. In high school, I won a few competitions. I also took some online courses from MIT during summers. And yet you chose political science as your major, Professor Winters observed. I'm interested in both, Caroline explained. They're not as different as people think. Both require logical thinking and solving complex problems. An interesting perspective, Professor Winters said. He seemed to be seeing her properly, for the first time. Professor Clark mentioned she suggested a double major. Yes, I'm considering it. It would be challenging, he warned. Few students can handle the workload. I like challenges, Caroline said simply. Professor Winters almost smiled. So I've noticed. He picked up a book from his desk and handed it to her. This might help with the competition. It covers some advanced topics that often appear in the challenges. Caroline took the book, surprised by the gesture. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Professor Winters said. My graduate student, Paul Henry, is also entering with his team. He's been the champion for 2 years running. Is that a warning? Caroline asked. Consider it context, Professor Winters replied. Good luck, Miss Leavitt. You'll need it. As Caroline left his office, she saw a tall young man with glasses waiting. Outside, he looked at the book in her hands with surprise. You must be Caroline, he said. I'm Paul Henry. Nice to meet you, Caroline said politely. Professor Winters gave you his copy of Nakamura's theorems? Paul looked impressed. He doesn't lend that to anyone. It's for the competition, Caroline explained. Paul's friendly expression cooled slightly. Ah, I heard you signed up. First year, student, right? Transfer student, Caroline corrected. Junior year. Still, the challenge is pretty advanced. Most teams prepare for months. We'll do our best, Karoline said. Paul nodded. I'm sure you will. See you at the competition. That evening, Karoline met with Olivia and Peter at the library to begin preparing for the challenge. They had 2 weeks until the competition. I saw you talking to Paul Henry, Peter said as they settled at their usual table. He's Professor Winters' star student. And our main competition, Olivia added. He's won the challenge twice already. Professor Winters mentioned that, Karoline said. She showed them the book he had lent her. He gave me this to help us prepare. Peter's eyes widened. That's Nakamura's theorems. It's like the Bible of advanced calculus. And it's Professor Winters' personal copy. See his notes in the margins? Karoline looked at the penciled notes throughout the book. The handwriting was neat and precise, just like the equations Professor Winters wrote on the board. Why would he help us? Olivia wondered. Especially when his own student is competing. Maybe he's starting to see past his prejudices, Karoline suggested. Or maybe he wants to see what you're really capable of, Peter said. They spent hours going through the book and working on practice problems. The challenge would require them to solve a series of increasingly difficult problems under time pressure. Teams would be eliminated after each round until only one remained. As they worked, Karoline noticed how well they functioned as a team. Olivia was organized and methodical, while Peter had an eye for spotting patterns. Together with Karoline's intuitive understanding of complex systems, they made a strong combination. We might actually have a chance, Peter said as they packed up their books later that night. We definitely have a chance, Karoline corrected him with a smile. But we need to keep practicing. For the first time since coming to Westfield University, Karoline felt truly excited about something. The challenge represented a chance to prove herself not just to Professor Winters, but to herself as well. Maybe she could balance both of her passions after all. As she walked back to her dorm, she thought about Professor Winters and his unexpected gesture with the book. People were complex, she realized, just like the mathematical problems she loved to solve. The 2 weeks before the mathematics department challenge passed quickly. Karoline, Olivia, and Peter spent every free moment preparing. They worked through Professor Winters' book, solved past competition problems, and developed strategies for working together efficiently. Word spread around campus about Karoline's perfect exam score. Other students began to ask her for help with their math problems. She always made time to explain things, breaking down complex ideas into simple steps that anyone could understand. One afternoon, as Karoline was tutoring a freshman in the library, she noticed Professor Clark watching her from a nearby table. After the student left, Professor Clark came over. You have a gift for teaching, she said, sitting down across from Karoline. The way you explain things makes mathematics accessible. Thank you, Karoline said. My dad always says if you understand something well, you should be able to explain it to anyone. Your father is a wise man. Professor Clark smiled. How are your preparations for the challenge going? Good, I think, Karoline replied. Professor Winters lent me his book on Nakamura's theorems. Professor Clark looked surprised. Did he really? That's unexpected. Is it that strange? Karoline asked. Alan doesn't share his books with anyone, Professor Clark explained. Especially not that one. It was a gift from his own professor when he was a student. Karoline didn't know what to say. She had assumed Professor Winters was just being fair, maybe making up for his earlier behavior. But this suggested something more. He seems to have recognized your talent, Professor Clark continued, despite your differences. I don't think he likes me very much, Karoline admitted. Alan has strong opinions about everything, Professor Clark said, but he respects mathematical ability above all else. By the way, have you thought more about the double major? Yes, Karoline said. I'd like to try it. Excellent, Professor Clark beamed. We'll make it official after the semester ends. The day of the competition arrived. The mathematics department had transformed the largest lecture hall into a contest arena. 8 teams of 3 students each took their places at separate tables. At the front of the room, a panel of professors, including Professor Winters, would serve as judges. Karoline, Olivia, and Peter found their assigned table. Across the room, Paul Henry and his team were already setting up, looking confident. Paul caught Karoline's eye and nodded respectfully. Professor Clark stood at the podium to explain the rules. The challenge consists of 4 rounds of increasing difficulty. After each round, the 2 lowest scoring teams will be eliminated. You have 1 hour per round. The team with the highest score in the final round wins. Assistants handed out sealed envelopes containing the first round of problems. "You may begin now," Professor Clark announced. Karoline opened their envelope and spread out the problems. There were 5 questions, each worth different points based on difficulty. "Let's each look at all of them first," Karoline suggested. "Then we can divide them up based on our strengths." They worked silently for a few minutes, reading through all the problems. Then they came together to make a plan. "I can handle problems 2 and 5, Olivia said. "They involve statistics, which is my strong area." "I'll take number 3, Peter offered. "It's about geometric sequences, which I'm good at." "I'll work on 1 and 4 then," Karoline said. "Let's check each other's work if we have time." They settled into a rhythm, working independently but checking in with each other regularly. Karoline finished her problems quickly and helped Peter with his. By the end of the hour, they had solved all 5 problems and checked their work twice. "Time's up," Professor Clark announced. "Please submit your solutions." As the judges reviewed the first round, the teams took a short break. Karoline noticed Professor Winters examining their solutions with particular interest. "How do you think we did?" Olivia asked nervously. "I think we solved everything correctly," Karoline said. "But the other teams look confident too." Professor Clark returned to the podium with the results. All teams performed well in the first round. However, Team Matthews and Team Johnson scored the lowest and will not continue to the next round. Karoline felt relieved. They had made it through the first cut. 6 teams remained. The second round was noticeably harder. The problems involved multivariable calculus and differential equations. Karoline had to help both Olivia and Peter with parts of their problems. They finished just as time was called. "That was close," Peter whispered as they handed in their solutions. 2 more teams were eliminated, leaving only 4 teams for the third round. Paul Henry's team looked completely relaxed, finishing their problems with time to spare. The third round contained only 3 problems, but they were extremely difficult. They involved concepts that weren't typically taught until graduate-level courses. "I don't even know where to begin with this one," Olivia admitted, staring at the second problem. "Let me see," Karoline said. She recognized the problem type from Professor Winters' book. It related to Nakamura's third theorem on complex systems. "I think I can solve this one. You 2 focus on the other problems." Karoline lost herself in the elegant complexity of the mathematics. This was the kind of problem she loved most. Challenging but beautiful in its structure. She worked steadily, unaware of time passing until Peter touched her shoulder. 10 minutes left, he warned. Karoline quickly finished her solution and helped check the others. They submitted their answers just as time ran out. This time, Professor Winters himself announced the results. Team Henry and Team Leavitt will advance to the final round. A murmur went through the audience. No one had expected a team of undergraduates to make it to the finals, especially against Paul Henry's experienced team. "We actually made it to the finals," Olivia said in disbelief. "Thanks to Karoline," Peter added. "That problem in round 3 was impossible." "Not impossible," Karoline corrected gently. "Just challenging." Professor Clark announced a 30-minute break before the final round. As students filed out to get refreshments, Professor Winters approached Karoline's team. "Your solution to problem 2 in the third round," he said without preamble. "How did you approach it?" "I recognized it as an application of Nakamura's third theorem," Karoline explained. "From your book." Professor Winters nodded. "Most students wouldn't make that connection. It's not taught in undergraduate courses. The margin notes in your book helped," Karoline admitted. "Your explanation clarified the theorem's application." For a moment, Professor Winters looked pleased. Then his professional demeanor returned. "The final round will be considerably more difficult. Only one problem, but it requires both creativity and technical skill. We'll do our best, Karoline promised. As Professor Winters walked away, Paul Henry approached them. Congratulations on making the finals, he said sincerely. No undergraduate team has done that in 5 years. Thanks, Karoline replied. Your team is amazing too. Paul smiled. It should be an interesting final round. May the best team win. When everyone returned for the final round, the atmosphere was tense with excitement. Only 2 teams remained, and a large audience had gathered to watch the conclusion. Professor Clark handed each team a sealed envelope. Inside is a single problem. You have 1 hour to solve it. This problem has multiple correct approaches, but some are more elegant than others. You will be judged not only on correctness, but also on the elegance and insight of your solution. Karoline opened their envelope and read the problem aloud to her teammates. It involved a complex system of equations with multiple variables and constraints, one of the most difficult problems she had ever seen. This is graduate-level research, Peter whispered, looking pale. We can do this, Karoline said firmly. Let's break it down step by step. They worked together with Karoline guiding them through the approach. Across the room, Paul's team was deep in discussion, with Paul doing most of the writing. Halfway through the time, Karoline had a sudden insight. Wait, she said, stopping Peter from continuing their current approach. There's a simpler way. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began writing rapidly. Olivia and Peter watched in amazement as a new solution took shape. This is brilliant, Peter said as he understood what Karoline was doing. You're using a completely different theorem to simplify the whole system. Karoline nodded, too focused to explain. Her mind was clear, filled only with the pure beauty of mathematics. This was why she loved it, these moments of perfect clarity, when everything connected. With 10 minutes remaining, she finished the solution and showed it to her teammates. They checked it carefully, looking for any errors or gaps in the logic. Finding none, they wrote up the final version and submitted it with 2 minutes to spare. Paul's team submitted their solution just seconds before time was called. Now all they could do was wait as the judges reviewed both solutions. The judges huddled at the front of the room, examining both solutions carefully. Professor Winters held Karoline's team's paper, pointing to specific sections and discussing them with the other professors. His face was serious, but Karoline thought she saw a hint of surprise in his expression. The audience waited quietly. No one had expected an undergraduate team to make it this far, especially against Paul Henry's experienced graduate team. Olivia squeezed Karoline's hand nervously. Peter kept checking and rechecking their solution in his head, muttering formulas under his breath. After what seemed like hours but was only 15 minutes, the judges reached their decision. Professor Clark returned to the podium, holding a small envelope. Both teams presented correct solutions to an extremely challenging problem, she announced. Team Henry used a traditional approach, executing it flawlessly with excellent technique. Paul and his teammates nodded confidently. They had used the standard method that most graduate students would recognize. Team Leavitt, Professor Clark continued, took a different approach. They applied Nakamura's alternate integration theory in a way that simplified the entire system. Whispers spread through the audience. Nakamura's alternate integration theory was advanced material, rarely taught even at the graduate level. The judges had to consider both technical correctness and elegant insight, Professor Clark said. Both solutions were technically perfect. However, one solution showed exceptional creativity and mathematical intuition. She opened the envelope. The winner of this year's Mathematics Department Challenge is Team Leavitt. The room erupted in applause. Olivia jumped up, hugging Karoline and Peter. They had won. Karoline could hardly believe it. She looked toward the judges' table and saw Professor Winters watching her. For the first time, he gave her a small but genuine nod of approval. Paul Henry was the first to approach them, offering his hand. Congratulations, he said sincerely. Your solution was brilliant. I never thought of using Nakamura's theory that way. Thank you, Karoline said, shaking his hand. Your team was amazing too. Where did you learn about Nakamura's alternate Integration theory? Paul asked curiously. It's not in any of our textbooks. It was in Professor Winter's book, Karoline explained. In his margin notes. Paul looked impressed. No wonder he looked so surprised. You applied his own research back at him. His research? Karoline asked, confused. Professor Winters has been developing extensions to Nakamura's theories for years, Paul explained. Those notes in his book are his original work, not published anywhere else yet. Karoline was stunned. She had used Professor Winters' own unpublished research to win the competition. No wonder he had looked so surprised. Professor Clark approached with certificates and a small trophy. Congratulations to all of you, she said warmly. Your victory will be announced at the honors ceremony next week, along with your scholarship awards. As the crowd began to disperse, Professor Winters walked over. Karoline expected him to be upset that she had used his research, but instead, he looked thoughtful. Ms. Leavitt, he said quietly, your application of the margin notes in my book was unexpected. I'm sorry if I shouldn't have used them, Karoline began. Professor Winters shook his head. No, that's not it. I'm impressed that you understood them well enough to apply them. Most of my graduate students struggle with those concepts. Your explanations in the margins were very clear, Karoline said honestly. I've been working on those extensions to Nakamura's theory for my next publication, Professor Winters explained. Your solution today demonstrated their practical application better than I've been able to do myself. Karoline didn't know what to say. This was high praise indeed. I'd like to discuss this further, Professor Winters continued. Would you be interested in helping me develop these ideas for publication as a research assistant? Karoline was shocked. Me? But I'm not even a math major yet. That can be arranged, Professor Clark interjected, having overheard the conversation. In fact, with your permission, I'd like to fast-track your application for the double major program. Yes, I'd be honored, Karoline managed to say. Excellent. Professor Winters nodded. We can begin next week after the honors ceremony. As the professors walked away, Olivia and Peter surrounded Karoline, bursting with excitement. Did Professor Winters just offer you a research position? Olivia asked in disbelief. I think he did, Karoline said, still trying to process what had happened. That's incredible, Peter said. He never takes undergrads as research assistants. The next week passed in a blur. News of their victory spread across campus. Students who had never spoken to Karoline before suddenly wanted to study with her. The campus newspaper ran a story about the unexpected undergraduate team that beat the graduate students at their own game. On the day of the honor ceremony, the auditorium was packed. Karoline sat with Olivia and Peter in the front row. Her parents had driven 6 hours to be there, beaming with pride. When it was time for the mathematics department awards, Professor Clark called them to the stage. She presented them with their certificates and scholarship checks, then handed the microphone to Professor Winters. This year's competition was unique, he began. For the first time in the history of our department, an undergraduate team not only reached the finals but won the entire challenge. He looked directly at Karoline. What makes this victory even more remarkable is the innovative approach taken by the team leader, Ms. Karoline Leavitt. She applied theoretical concepts in a way that demonstrated not just technical skill, but true mathematical insight. Karoline felt herself blush as the audience applauded. In my 30 years of teaching, Professor Winters continued, I have learned that mathematical ability is not determined by political views, background, or any other external factor. It is found in unexpected places in students who challenge not just the problems I give them, but sometimes even my own assumptions. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Professor Winters was known for never admitting he was wrong about anything. I am pleased to announce that Ms. Leavitt has agreed to join my research team as we develop new extensions to Nakamura's integration theory. Her contributions will be acknowledged in our forthcoming publication. After the ceremony, Karoline's parents hugged her tightly. We're so proud of you, her mother said, wiping away tears. I didn't understand half of what they were talking about up there, her father admitted with a laugh. But I know my daughter did something special. Professor Winters approached them, looking almost uncomfortable in a social setting. Mr. and Mrs. Leavitt, he said formally, you have a remarkable daughter. We've always thought so, Karoline's father said, shaking the professor's hand. Later that evening, Karoline found herself alone with Professor Winters in his office discussing the research project they would begin the following week. I owe you an apology, Ms. Leavitt, Professor Winters said suddenly, setting down his notes. For what? Karoline asked, though she knew. For judging you based on your political background rather than your abilities. It was unprofessional and unfair. Karoline was surprised by his directness. Thank you for saying that. Mathematics should transcend politics, Professor Winters continued. I forgot that for a while. Maybe both fields could learn something from each other, Karoline suggested. Mathematics teaches us to think logically and find elegant solutions. Politics reminds us that human problems are complex and rarely have just one right answer. Professor Winters considered this. An interesting perspective. Perhaps that's why you excel at both. As Karoline left his office that evening, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond winning a competition. She had stood firm in the face of prejudice, proven her abilities, and even changed someone's mind along the way. The semester was far from over, and balancing a double major with research work would be challenging. But Karoline Leavitt wasn't afraid of challenges. After all, every complex problem could be solved with the right approach, whether in mathematics or in life.